friends. Welcome to Foggy Oak Fairy Tales, a stories podcast for all ages, where we tell farm stories from real life happenings on Foggy Oak Farm, as well as fantasy tales to spark both learning and imagination. I'm so glad you're here. This month's episode is an adaptation of one of the oldest known fairy tales. A blacksmith makes a bargain with death and then works to outwit him time and time again. This adaptation is most closely based on the Welsh version of the story, Billy, Duffy, and the Devil, found in Welsh Fairy Tales and Other Stories, collected and edited by P.H. Emerson in 1894. But iterations of the story trace back 5,000 to 6,000 years and have been found in 35 different languages all across the world. If there was ever a classic, this would be it. Once upon a time and long ago, there lived a blacksmith named Billy Duffy. Billy was known around his village for being clever, kind, and talented at just about anything he put his mind to. There wasn't a horse he couldn't shoe, a dagger he couldn't forge, or a game of chance he couldn't win. Now, it so happened that one night, Billy was at the local tavern with his friends, and they were challenging each other with various riddles and obscure questions. Billy had handily beaten everyone, and in good-natured frustration at being trounced, one of his friends slapped the table and declared, "Billy, you're a cleverer lad than any I know, and I'd wager you're clever enough to outwit Death himself." Everyone laughed and gave Billy thumps on the back as they headed back home for the evening. As Billy wandered back towards his smithy, he happened upon a stranger, swathed in a long black coat. The stranger addressed him. "And would you be Billy Duffy the smith, who some say is clever enough to outwit Death himself?" "Sure, and I am Billy Duffy the smith, though I don't know that I'd claim the rest," Billy said with a laugh. "Well, Billy," the stranger replied, "what if we see whether you really are clever enough?" And so asking, the stranger drew back his hood, and Billy knew that he really was talking to Death. "I'll make it worth your while. I can never resist a challenge, after all," Death said. "What say I set you up with as much money as you can spend and all the supplies you might need for your smithy for the next 7 years, and then I'll come to claim you. Unless, of course, you can figure out a way to avoid me," Death proposed. "That seems a fair wager," Billy agreed genially and stuck out his hand to shake. He had no idea how he would avoid or outwit Death in 7 years, but 7 years seemed like a long time for as much money as he could spend and all the supplies he could need, and Billy was quietly confident that he could figure it out. Death shook Billy's offered hand and disappeared in a swirl of smoke. Billy talked to himself as he finished his walk home. "Now you've gone and done it, Billy. This will either be the triumph of a lifetime or the greatest mistake you'll ever make. Either way, trying to outwit Death will surely bring its share of adventure." He whistled a bit to himself as he finished his walk home and went to bed. Unbeknownst to him, other creatures of the fairy variety had been listening to the bargain and were quite intrigued by Billy's boldness. Several who were listening scurried back to tell the Fairy King about Death's wager with Billy Duffy, and the Fairy King decided that he needed to meet this brash young mortal for himself. The next morning, Billy was working away at his forge when a tattered and tired older man walked into his smithy. "Oh, young sir, could you spare some food and drink for a hungry man?" the man asked Billy. "I can spare more than that," Billy replied, pausing his work. He brought the man a good meal and a hearty ale and handed him a sack full of coins. "I've been lucky and I have as much as I need. The least I can do is share it with others," Billy told him. The man thanked Billy profusely, ate his meal, drank his ale, and headed off on his way. Billy returned to the forge and was working away when, around midday, another tattered and tired soul entered his smithy. The conversation played out as it had before, and Billy gave the man a good meal, a good drink, and a purse of coins to take on the road with him. The man thanked Billy and went on his way. Billy went back to forging nails. The day had stretched into evening when a third man appeared. His needs were the same as the prior two, and Billy helped him selflessly, offering food and drink and money just as he had before. This time, instead of setting off down the road again once the man thanked Billy, he was suddenly transformed into the regal fairy king. Billy had never met the fairy king, but his tall form, pointed ears, and jewel-encrusted clothing pretty much gave his identity away. 3 times I have come to you in disguise as a person with need, and 3 times you have helped me without complaint and with open-handed generosity. I've met many a mortal who thought they could work their way around death, but I've never met one as kind as you, Billy Duffy, the king said to him. For your selflessness times 3, I will grant ye 3 wishes to help you in your quest to outmaneuver death. He's had quite enough success anyway, in my opinion, to make it too easy for him. Thank you, your highness, Billy said. And when do I need to make these wishes by? That's up to you, the fairy king said. I'll make no requirements. Give me until tomorrow morning, if you would, your majesty, and I'll have my wishes ready, Billy promised. The king agreed and departed. Billy spent the rest of the night devising his plan, and by the next morning, when the fairy king returned, Billy was ready. Tell me your wishes then, Billy, and I'll grant them, the fairy king said. Thank you, your highness, Billy began. First, I've a grand old sledgehammer and anvil here in the smithy, and I wish that anyone who takes hold of that sledgehammer, save myself, of course, will be forced to strike at that anvil without either breaking until I tell them to stop. I don't see what good that wish will do you, the king worried. Never you mind, your majesty. Trust me that it's what I need, Billy said cheerfully. Very well, but do be wiser with your second wish, the king warned. I'll be careful enough. My second wish is for a sack that holds whatever I may put into it, and none can remove items from it but myself. That also seems a waste of a wish to me, Billy, but very well, your wish is granted. Won't you do better with your final wish? The king implored. My final wish is the very best, Billy said with a grin. I've an armchair upstairs, and I wish that anyone who sits in it will not be able to get up until I say so. The fairy king quirked an eyebrow at yet another strange wish, but followed through and granted each one. Best of luck to you then, Billy. I'll be interested to see whether it works for you in 7 years' time. So will I, Billy laughed. And for the next 7 years, Billy made the most of his endless money and resources, sharing his bounty freely with any who had need, and creating marvelous sculptures and farming implements, and swords and pans and anything else that was needed for use or beauty both. And in the morning after the last day of his 7 years, Death arrived at the smithy. Knowing that Death would have kept to a prompt schedule, Billy had been up most of the night, working his forge and keeping many little projects going. So when Death arrived, he greeted him cheerfully. Ho there, Death, and how's it all going for you then? He asked. I'll be taking you this morning as I promised. That's how it's all going for me, Death snarled. Oh, I know it well, and I've only been finishing up a few projects to help the village after I'm dead. Won't you help me speed it along by taking hold of the sledgehammer and hammering this horseshoe for a few times while I finish off these nails in the forge? Billy asked. If it means you'll come without a fuss, very well, Death agreed. And he took hold of the handle of the sledgehammer and gave the horseshoe a few mighty strikes against the anvil. But then Death couldn't let go. He was done striking. He knew he was done striking, and yet he could not stop. Death pulled and he yanked and he twisted and turned, but he could not let go of the hammer, no matter how hard he tried. "Well, looks like you'll be at that for a bit, doesn't it?" Billy said guilelessly. "I'll leave you to it then and come back and check on you to see if you finished so we can go, eh?" And without waiting for a response, Billy sauntered out of the smithy and locked the door behind him. Billy stayed away for 3 days, and when he returned, he heard the hammer striking the anvil as forcefully and loudly as it ever had during those very first strikes Death made. When he unlocked the door to go inside and check on Death, he was greeted by a furious roar. "Billy Duffy, you've played a fine trick on me. Let me go this instant." I could do that, of course, but it seems a shame to let you go so that I can die," Billy prevaricated. "Perhaps you'd like to offer me something if I agree to let you go." "Very well. 7 more years and all the food and drink you desire, plus everything you had from our first deal," Death choked out. "Sure, and that's a fine deal. Hammer, release Death if you'd be so kind," Billy said to the sledgehammer. And with that, the sledgehammer clanged to the ground, and Death vanished. Billy whistled to himself as he went back to his forge to rekindle the fires that had gone out during Death's long sojourn at the anvil. And 7 years passed much as the last had, except now Billy could provide food and money to any who needed it. His region became happy and prosperous and was known as the friendliest and most generous place you could hope to find yourself. And just as before, the morning after the last day of the 7th year, Death appeared at the smithy. "I've come for you as I promised, Billy," Death rumbled. "And don't think to be tricking me this time." "I can't say as I really expected to trick you the first time," Billy exclaimed, holding up his hands in a declaration of innocence. "And to make amends, since I did feel bad letting you work on that horseshoe for so long, though you did a marvelous job on it and it's the best I've ever seen, I've gotten you a wee present." And Billy handed Death the holdfast sack given to him by the fairy king. "You wouldn't be thinking to trick me again now, would you, Billy? You can't kill Death with a poisonous creature or other nasty surprise, you know," Death said, cautiously taking the sack. Billy chuckled. "Since you are Death, you can hardly have anything to fear from a present from a mortal now, can you?" Death cautiously opened the sack and reached down inside. But when he didn't find anything, he pulled it up to his face to see if he was simply missing the present. And that's when Billy pounced and drew the sack entirely over Death. "What's this?" Death yelled, struggling to get out. "Never you mind. I'm going to make the sack fit you better," Billy said as he carried the struggling Death over to his anvil. Death kicked and he twisted and he flopped and he flipped, but he could not get out of the sack, no matter how hard he tried. And Billy began to pound away at the sack with Death inside, all the while explaining how it would be ever so much better once it fit him. Death, not caring for having his body pounded by a sledgehammer over and over again, cried out, "Stop this hammering at once!" "Oh, you don't like your gift, I take it," Billy said mournfully. "But it's bad form to reject a gift, didn't you know? What will you give me if I release you and forgive the insult?" 7 more years, everything you had before, and a forge that heats and takes care of itself," Death said in a rush, eager to stop any further hammering. "That's a grand deal, and I'll forgive you entirely," Billy said, setting the bag on the ground and releasing the opening. Death crawled out and was gone, in a flash of fury and swirling robes. And over the next 7 years, Billy created larger and more marvelous sculptures, stronger farming implements, more beautifully decorated pots and pans and swords and knives, and everything anyone could need or ask for, with a degree of mastery and enjoyment unparalleled in the known world. At the end of his 7 years, Billy did not stay up all night running his forge and creating final objects. Instead, he went to bed and got a good night's sleep. And when he woke in the morning, Death was there, at the foot of his bed, tapping his foot impatiently. "I've waited long enough for you, Billy Duffy, and you'll be coming with me now." "And it's glad I am to see you," Billy greeted him. "Do sit while I dress and wash my face, and then we'll be off together for once and all." Death, lulled into a false sense of security by meeting in Billy's bedroom and not the smithy, didn't see the harm in sitting down. But Death sat in Billy's magic armchair. Billy got up, got dressed, washed his face, and then turned to Death. "You wouldn't mind staying for a bit of tea and breakfast now, would you?" he asked. "Only get up if you want to leave, and we'll go instead." Death glowered at him. "Of course we're not having breakfast together. We are leaving immediately," he declared, and tried to rise, and tried again, and again, and he could not get up. "While you think about it, I'll just go and fetch that breakfast," Billy said, and off he sauntered. "Billy Duffy, you get back here and release me from this blasted chair!" Death yelled down the stairs at the rapidly retreating Billy. Death bumped and he pulled and he flopped and he flipped, but he could not get out of the chair, no matter how hard he tried. And when Billy popped his head back up the stairs after gathering a delicious breakfast and saw the angry and snarling face of Death in his chair, he gave an exaggerated sigh. "Well, as you're in a foul mood, I'm sure you'll take no offense if I break my fast elsewhere. Do come and get me if you're ready to go before I'm done," he said, and took himself out of the house and away to town, listening to Death's bellows of frustration, growing fainter as he walked further and further down the road. This time, Billy thought it wise to give Death a full week stuck in the chair to come to a more peaceable frame of mind. When he came back home after the 7th day and walked upstairs, he found an exhausted Death staring listlessly out the window. "You needn't even ask this time. I never want to see you again. Release me and you and I will never cross paths again." Death spoke quietly and refused to even turn his head to look at Billy. "On the one hand, it's a shame to give up your company since I've become so fond of it," Billy mused. "But that seems a fair bargain for letting you go, and if I'm anything, I'm a fair man." And so saying, Billy released Death from the armchair. True to his word, Death vanished and never visited Billy Duffy again. You can still find Billy to this day, working at his forge, helping his neighbors and any who have need, and whistling a happy song as he hammers out his creations. And you can find Death, well, pretty much anywhere else, but never, and I mean never, at Billy Duffy's house again. The end. One of the things that I really appreciate about this particular fairy tale is how many iterations there are and how old it is. I previewed that at the beginning of the episode and just wanted to reiterate it at the end now that we've all heard it. It's really interesting to go back into those old fairy tales and find stories that are still just as interesting and fun to listen to today as they were thousands of years ago. For those of you listening in the United States, I want to take a moment to wish you a happy Thanksgiving if you celebrate. We are going to be hosting a bunch of our family and friends here at Foggy Oak Farm for Thanksgiving this year, and I am really thankful that they are coming, and I am excited to celebrate with them. And I hope that if you are celebrating Thanksgiving, you are doing it with people that you love and care about who are going to help you make some wonderful memories. I really appreciate you being here, and I hope you have a wonderful holiday. Remember, you're part of the story too. What did you think of this story? What did you imagine when you were listening? We'd love to hear your part of the story. If you and your grown-up want, you can share your thoughts or a picture you drew with our Foggy Oak podcast family. You might find it easiest to share with us on Facebook at Foggy Oak Farm. But we have lots of options on our website, foggyoakfairytales.com. You can also check out pictures from the farm and learn more about us. Thanks for being part of the story, and I hope you'll join us next week.